Force equals mass times acceleration, otherwise known as F equals ma, or as I like to call it, FullMetal Alchemist. I didn't know how to start this video, so this is the best you're getting. Deal with it. It's FMA Day! If this video gets done when I want it to. October 3rd, the most important date in the FullMetal Alchemist universe. It was the day Edward and Alphonse Elric left home on their quest to regain their original bodies, burning down their homes so they had no place to run back to and no direction to go other than forward. FullMetal Alchemist, specifically the 2003 version, is such an important series to me. Like any child, I watched the occasional stray episode of Dragon Ball Z Kai, Naruto, and of course, the almighty Avatar: The Last Airbender, but FullMetal Alchemist 2003 was the first true-blood Japanese anime I ever watched from beginning to end, and it still stands as one of my favorite anime of all time. I even like it more than the manga faithful FullMetal Alchemist Brotherhood, and no, I won't explain myself. And because FullMetal Alchemist 2003 is such an important series to me, and because I now have a platform to work with, I wanted to make something for FMA Day. Unfortunately, I didn't really have the time to rewatch the whole 51 episode series to talk in depth about the series' more dense thematic elements. I'm sorry, I'm not perfect. I had other things to do, so instead, I wanted to talk about something smaller. A single shot. It's the shot that I think of whenever I think of this series, a shot that manages to tell an entire story in only about 4 seconds. And it's this shot right here. You better get used to this image because it's all you're going to see for the next 4 or 5 minutes. I'm going to examine this shot completely out of context from the episode it stands in, as well as the overarching plot of the series as a whole. Then I'll try to figure out what story we get solely from these 4 seconds, and finally, we'll place the shot back into context to see just how much information it gave us all on its own. Ready? Go! First, I wanted to talk about the overall mood the shot creates through its use of color and space. This part is pretty simple. The environment around them is full of dark, muted colors with a somber blue dominating most of the scene. It surrounds our two characters here on all sides, almost like it's boxing them in as close to each other as possible with no part of the frame being left open or clear. There's a tree trunk on the left here, some weird stacks of stones over here, treetops covering the top, and solid ground sitting on the bottom. It gives an oppressive feeling to the deep blue's melancholic sensation. You can't escape the sadness. You can't get out. Jim, you have to accept it. You have to just face it. Don't be afraid of your emotions, Jim. It wasn't your fault, Jim. You have to wake up. Whew. Oh man, that was weird. Just blacked out there for a second. Anyway, this oppressive, somber atmosphere almost makes this moment feel inevitable. Just as the shot's use of space makes it impossible to escape the mood of the moment, the characters are trapped within this frame too, stuck in this moment, whatever this moment actually is. We are getting off to a sad note already, aren't we? Alright, colors done, space done, camera movement next. As you can probably tell, the camera is moving up. This kind of shot is called a pedestal, and what I want to highlight about this particular camera movement is the way that it reveals the characters in the shot. As you've also probably noticed, there are 2 characters here, and for the sake of a lack of context, I think I'll name them. Bessie and Billy. Yeah, sure. And what I want to note is that we can see the entirety of Bessie before we can see the entirety of Billy. We'll get to what's actually happening between them in a second, but just look at the shot at this point right here. Billy looks like a giant. He obviously isn't, but the way the camera moves upward, revealing Bessie first and Billy second, gives them both power, but gives significantly more power to Billy, making him seem to tower over Bessie. He is the one in control here. Speaking of which, we should probably get around to this whole mess here. While Bessie has her hands around Billy's throat, it certainly doesn't feel like she has any of the power or control in this moment. This is due in part to the pedestal movement we talked about before, but I also want to draw attention to the way the shot is framed. It's tilted to the left, almost as though the weight of Bessie is pushing the frame down. It gives this sense that the overall weight of the scene itself is coming from her and how she feels about everything. But she's also on her knees, her head pointed down, almost like she's tired. She might be causing the weight of the shot itself, but she's feeling that weight just as much as the shot is. But do you know who isn't feeling that weight? Billy. Despite having a pair of hands around his throat, and despite the shot being tilted in a direction that should affect him, he stands straight-backed and calm, looking above Bessie's head almost as though he's bored by the situation and is daydreaming about something more interesting. Despite all the weight being sourced back to Bessie, all the control and power is with Billy. But there is one other thing about Billy I haven't mentioned yet that, if I'm not stretching things, which I might be, is probably the most important aspect of this shot. His left foot. It's not flat on the ground like it probably should be. The rest of the things in this shot indicate that this character has power and control, yet this foot seems almost unsure. It's just off the ground, almost like it's ready to bolt, like it's uncertain of where it stands and isn't quite sure if it's even actually supposed to be there. Keep in mind that this is the left foot. That'll be important for when we put this all back into context, but right now, just the fact that this foot is lifted like this gives the character a tiny sense of uncertainty the rest of his stance lacks. Okay, now that we've looked at all of that, I think it's time to put it all together like a bad puzzle and figure out what specifically this shot is telling us on its own. So, here's what we know. Bessie and Billy are in some kind of conflict with one another, obviously, and with the boxed-in nature of the frame, we can assume that this moment has been a long time coming. However, something about this conflict keeps the power away from Bessie and gives it all to Billy. Whatever this relationship is, it's stopping Bessie from going all the way and presumably killing Billy. And he knows this. He isn't worried, he isn't scared, he's barely even interested in what's going on. He knows that he has all the pieces and whatever is plaguing Bessie is certainly not plaguing him. But, because of his foot being slightly lifted off the ground, we know that he has some sort of doubt about his position. That while he may be trying to come off as calm, confident, and unmoving, there is a part of him that feels the same level of emotion that Bessie feels. That's quite a bit with no context. Just put this in a frame, put it in the Louvre, and we have ourselves a genuine piece of art right here. But let's go one step farther with this. Let's take this shot and everything we've learned from it and put it back into the context we've taken it out of. Let's hear the full story of what led to this moment in order to recognize just how great this shot is and why it works in context because of how well it works out of it. And there are going to be some minor spoilers ahead, so keep that in mind. Izumi Curtis was an extremely talented alchemist living a relatively quiet life as a simple housewife until she became the alchemy teacher of Edward and Alphonse. But before that, Izumi and her husband Sig really only wanted one thing: a child to call their own. However, despite how much they tried, it just wasn't happening. But with perseverance, Izumi finally got pregnant only to give birth to a stillborn child. Distraught, overcome with grief, and desperate for the child to live, Izumi did the unthinkable and used alchemy to perform human transmutation on the body. And if you haven't watched the show, that simply means that she tried to bring the child back to life. But in the world of alchemy, nothing can be gained without something equal being lost, and what could be equal to a human soul? After performing the transmutation, Izumi lost a large chunk of her internal organs as a price for the life she was trying to create, but the life she created was nothing more than a disgusting abomination against nature itself. And as such, she gave that life to powers beyond her understanding, the things that made alchemy possible. And while her internal organs managed to haphazardly fix themselves, the despair of losing any chance she had at having a child of her own was never quite repaired, even as she acted as a surrogate mother to the Elrics. Then, years later, a young boy appears seemingly from nowhere on the same island in which Izumi performed human transmutation, completely unaware of who or what he was. And it's implied that Izumi immediately knows the truth, that being that this is the same boy that was taken away from her years before. A homunculus, or an artificial human with no soul, that she created from the body of her stillborn child. She knows it's not hers, and she knows it isn't human, but she can't help but live for a while with the child she never got to have. But she knew what had to be done eventually. This child that was not hers, this child that wasn't even human, this thing that she created, it was her responsibility. And she had to kill it. But the child, who was given the name of Wrath, regained his memories with the help of another homunculus named Envy. He grew a disdain for the mother that created him, and he knew just how small the chance was that she would actually be willing to kill him. But within that was doubt, uncertainty at what he really was and what he was doing. While he gives off this sense of confidence and hatred towards the things that created him, he's also imbued with a deep sadness towards his own incomplete and soulless nature. And while he rejects the one person that was ever willing to show him love, it's exactly that love that he really wants. And it only makes sense that we see this in his hovering left foot, since his left foot was actually grafted onto him when Edward Elric lost it trying to bring his mother back to life. That foot isn't a true part of who he is, rather it's a symbol of his own uncertainty about his identity and what he truly desires. And that brings us to this shot. where Izumi Curtis simply can't bring herself to kill the result of her own desperation. The thing that makes this shot so exceptional is not necessarily how it tells the broad strokes of this story in only 4 seconds, you'd already know the story having watched it to get to this point, but more how it's crafted from all of those separate elements. Each aspect of this shot is built from the foundation of the narrative that came before it. It gives this moment a sense of emotional heft, as it really feels as though this whole subplot has been leading to this very moment. This emotional climax where Izumi is forced to face the sins of her past that are in direct conflict with the desires she's always held. This moment represents that conflict coming to a head, and the shot is constructed from every piece of it, making it all the more emotionally satisfying and comprehensive. And it really just goes to show how important the details are. That no matter how seemingly insignificant, something as small as a slightly raised foot can tell the audience so much or embody such a large part of a character. It's one of the many reasons I love this show. It paid attention to the details.